Many of you may be wondering, what does it take to permit an unpermitted ADU? What if you purchased a house and there's no permits showing up, or they're outdated and can't be found? After all, some of the municipalities had fires on codes. What if you're not sure what was done? All those are considered to be unpermitted ADUs, and you're not alone. Approximately 50% of all ADUs in California are expected to be unpermitted, but of course, there's no real way to know. The good news is there is a general amnesty trying to bring ADUs up to code so that they are safe and housable. And as we've talked before, there's some real consequences to not permitting an ADU. So let's get started. The first phase of getting an unpermitted ADU permitted is talking to a professional, just finding out what's happening here. Was this built to code? What would need to be adjusted? What was it built since the last code that might need to be updated? When you talk to a professional ADU contractor, they can tell you what needs to be brought up to code or what that total cost and repair is. And that's a private conversation between you and the contractor just to get a general scope of work. That might also include looking at structural engineering, Title 24 calculations, which is energy efficiency, and more. So once you have that estimate, that will tell you a good idea of whether the project is up to code, or if there's items that need to be addressed and what those items might cost. Phase 2 is submitting the permit application to bring those actually up to code. That evaluation process typically takes about 8 weeks, and that's where you're officially informing the local municipality that you have an unpermitted ADU, you know what the issues are, and you plan to bring it up to code. Expect a couple of rounds of comments and revisions between the permit office and your contractor or draftsman or architect before your final plan gets added. Then comes the actual construction and inspection once those plans are approved. They're gonna go out and inspect the physical property that can be examined, including drywall, foundations, footings, sewer lines, much more, utilities. Some of the walls may be opened up if they're not sure. If you don't have original architectural plans, your contractor will have to make new ones, and they may want to check. That's okay. It's just drywall repair for the most part, just to make sure that everything is going to be up to code. Expect that process to take anywhere between 1 and 12 months before it finally receives the final certificate of occupancy. And that's what happens with your final inspection, and now your ADU is up to code. Now, what kind of costs can you expect? Well, typically those initial architectural and structural engineering plans in phase 1 cost anywhere between $5,000 to $30,000, especially higher prices on older homes. You'll see why in a second. Permit application fees are between $5,000 and $20,000. A couple of wonderful municipalities have actually waived those fees in order as sort of a general amnesty on bringing ADUs up to code. And finally, of course, you've got construction and labor materials in those costs. Note, don't ever start construction and then look for the loan. It's the black hole of lending. So make sure once you get an estimated cost in phase 1 that you talk to me about what it's going to cost to build, and we make sure you have 100% of the cost. The last thing you want to do is notify your local housing authority that you're bringing this up to code and then run out of money midway through construction. So all of this really varies. I have seen permits be issued for as low as $5,000 or $10,000, which is about $50 a month when financed. The common corrections that we see out there is things like energy and windows, utility meters and connections, which by the way can be a fire hazard, fire walls, water heaters, electrical, plumbing, wall framing, and roof structure and foundation. The major cost drivers really depend on really just how poorly connected. Sometimes grandpa updated it and he had no construction skills. In many other cases, an actual contractor built it, they just never bothered with permits. So it depends on the structure. Generally speaking, you can see costs go up with the age of construction. If the ADU was built in the past 5 years, you may just need plans, permits, and smoke alarms. That's as low as $20,000 or less. And believe it or not, we can finance that very cheaply. If it was built before 2018, you probably need to update it to Title 24 energy codes, maybe some windows and insulation, but it doesn't need to be that much. For the units, particularly detached garages built in the 1960s, that's where we really start to see repairs. Oftentimes, the foundations need to be reinforced, the footings need to be reinforced, roof beams, and of course, electrical connections and insulation. Those old garages were built with very thin walls, and they're just not up to residential housing codes. And then finally, the really old detached structures that were poorly built, you may be looking at a demolition or reinforcing so much. Typically, I see that cost about $200,000. But by the way, that's about $1,000 a month. And the rental income will more than pay for that. There's a couple myths and facts about permitting ADUs. I mean, after all, why should you build an unpermitted ADU and you can just legalize it later? In fact, unpermitted ADUs are more prone to construction errors, and you are liable for that. And then when you go to permit it, you might be subject to even stricter standards. And in the meantime, your renter can sue you for all their back rent. If a safety issue happens, you are liable. Myth number 2, if you ask your local planning department about legalizing an unpermitted unit, will they open code enforcement? No, not if you don't tell them the address. And they are open to hypothetical questions about particular properties. And so it's worth even a discussion going into your city hall, going up to the permit desk, and literally talking across the counter about, what your project is. You don't need to tell them their name, their address, and so on. That's fine. Myth number 3, will you be forced to demolish the space? Probably not unless it's really built poorly. And then there's the question of fire, safety hazards, and far worse issues than demolishing the ADU. So think long and hard about what risks you really want to face. Next myth is legalizing the ADU will lead to a big jump in property taxes. No, it doesn't cause a reassessment of the entire property. Legalizing your ADU only increases the value of the ADU. And if that was already included in existing space, chances is you'll have no increase at all. Beyond that, what the tax assessor asks for is an estimate of the cost to permit, to bring that up to code. If it's not included, the square footage is not included, they'll take that estimate, they'll multiply it by 1%, and they'll just add that. So if your construction costs to permit the ADU are $120,000, it's about $100 a month next year added to your tax bill. That's all. And again, the rent will more than cover it. Myth, can I avoid rent control and tenant eviction protections by building the ADU without permits? Nope. In fact, you are more liable. And if renters or your neighbors turn you in for an unpermitted ADU, your renters can sue you and get all of their rent back from day one and continue living there with no rent. I've personally had clients facing that. Don't risk it.